Hello, this is Dr. Justina Agnieszka Chevalier in series meant for African Americans per demand and about language. The second topic that I would like to cover right now, because the prior one was various methods of verbal self-defense, is when using these creates risk and harm to you. Always, first, assume good intentions. Those good intentions cannot include, now listen to me carefully, explicit intent in limitation of your movement, injection or administration unwanted by you substances by you, framing in doing such towards others, that's 3, impeding statement of truth and self-representation, and presenting false statements about such by somebody else. Intent, explicit one, to kill you, deprived of freedom, limit what is basic for others, such as in my case, especially for human rights activists, perhaps also that African American person that was published in New York Times that approached me. And that is when you recognize, one, in person that approaches, in speech, buzzwords, and by authority, is person trying to soothe by offering assistance and own participation, past abuse of those to harm you or harm others? Or is person trying to use that being customary or even normative, though being illegal? And when you have such established, then if that person is trying to perpetuate harm, limitation of freedom, or perpetuate support for persons who do so, use self-defense, reduce to minimum contact, and make sure that that person is blacklisted. Next, do not generalize to groups. And next, when speech is presented as forceful, convincing, or you are approached to participate in such for help, make sure that that person does not try to downgrade or abuse what is the true reality of your actions, intentions, words, or in the past such, for personal benefit, such as many African Americans have done in the past, to prejudice themselves, because otherwise we were actually quite organized, good in collaboration group. And so in cases when a person approaches verbally abusing, expecting obtention of personal benefit, quoting your status as unjustified, for instance, your personal safety, well-being, or basic needs, to harm you and posing such as in disregard of that person, always use deflecting and ignoring that person when that is the case. If that is not the case, then make sure that you find allies. And if not allies, if persons in being in allianship try to dominate, make sure that they have the same degree of knowledge and up-to-date information at all times, and are at all times independent in judgment, and follow what developments are expressed in actions and in information. So those two aspects are important. Why? Because often we read against cognitive behavioral rules, negative intentions in everything, instead of supplementation or providing awareness to finish action to benefit all. For example, I am very grateful and I thank African Americans for the march through the area where I was assaulted, the Golden Gate Bridge, by 5 police officers and me, I recognize it as Latin American guard, in what first was attempt on homicide and then became attempt to pulse fight by rubbing my hand and legs into concrete by that person, then calling reinforcement of police in front of witnesses, despite me applying rules of stating my name, purpose, and being a jogger, and in ignorance of all else, dragging me across, closing up in the car, and then putting me in a perpetuation of intent to kill with psychotropic drugs under an involuntary and non-justified. I was just a jogger who was blocked and attacked by person from Latin America to back up my ex-spouse and persons who he hired to sustain reputation after severe psychological abuse dismissed by HPD at the time of reporting. And such I reported then to International Tribunal of Human Rights in Africa as personal case, and because of that not being possible to pursue legally, African American and Americans became advocating for what is discrimination of rights in abuse of legal persona by fictional accusation of intent to disrupt order, fictional accusations of crimes, and diminishment of achievements and abilities by promoting persons who are less capable. And such was the result that even though a person who was advocating as part of African and African American group that I actually collaborated for a short time with, that despite the fact that the person, actually the police officer, snapped and killed an African person or African American person, there was a surge of human rights movement, and I was the one who was assaulted on that bridge. For that, because it was omitted from press and not stated as such, which disguises rights of persons also represented by white minorities, including foreign medical graduates, persons who work over hours deprived of support, legal support, and are in state of human slavery and are white, especially in central states, and are unable also in states where majority is of a different race, pursue status of minority despite being minority being white, which that adds to that law applying to Black Lives Matter and White Lives Matter. And I ask you as African Americans to add that to pursuit of justice in scope of human rights activism and your organizations, because disguising of such crime as my assault and presenting it as a problem intrinsic to African Americans creates an injustice, social injustice, in which that right is pertinent to in fact worldwide majority and seems like black supremacism worldwide. And such is then state of human rights worldwide that it is impossible to pursue legal ways when there is injustice, and it is wrong. Harm was done, and parading that person is disrespectful and presents African Americans as weak, or basing on achievements, which is misleading, because I worked with African Americans alongside, trained some, and they became emancipated and independent workers. And I also worked to provide, and I worked also to defend and represent, and I expect the same. Otherwise, it is power struggle between black persons and white persons that selectively allows for death of black persons at hands of black persons or white persons, targeting authorities to disable federal government from obedience to legal act that is to benefit all worldwide, and use of such support as tribunals to assure of such in no intent to harm or kill. Again, I thank you for marching through that bridge, but as you can see, I am not black, and I was assaulted and impeded from legal representation. And as human rights activists, it made me to defend persons who are white and defend persons who are attacked then based on characteristics such as police from acts in assumption of racism as intention. It has never been mine in action, often risking my well-being and life, as well as at expense my then existing family. And it should not be, when persons are objective and independent, on mind of African Americans who are activists, or persons who are published and renowned in their area, such as those that approached me in Texas. So remember, use defense and to use verbal defense and knowledge I've provided to you towards situation in which assumption of your wrongdoing is not only false, but also it is with intent to harm or kill you, or do such to others using you. Otherwise, do not use it, or you will generate fear, and in that fear, persons who experienced in the past harm at hands of mental health, especially human rights activists, in context of Asia, Poland, and Soviet Union, other places of Soviet Union, and in context of certain states of the United States, you will meet with fear and contra-action that consists of arming up and in blocks persecution. And that persecution, if you had good intentions, will harm also I in extension of you, just by the fact of being a physician and first graduate, at least in Texas, of leadership in education and neurodevelopmental disorders that included human rights advocacy, on top of training obtained in Poland, in Warsaw School of Law, in high school, in Olympics organized by University of Toruń, of Nicholas Copernicus, which is renowned for human rights, as well as in persistent and consecutive actions in medical school to prevent death at hands of medical field and medical field professionals, to contrast impeding on religious grounds, divorces, freedom of change of status, especially marital status, freedom of pursuit of children versus use of contraceptives, freedom of changing place of living and choosing so based on qualification, and freedom that is impeded by authorities and mental health is contrasted by civic action a little bit more than Mr. Moore, that is devoid of sense and theatrical in nature, while persons die in masses, and has such in personnel who provides merely assistance or presentation to nonsensical messages and movies, no purpose more than fame to that person that on false pretenses presents himself as civic activist. And in many of those cases, it is not criticism per se of action that is courageous, but criticism of content that is lacking, that needs to follow in action and in pursuit and in enforcefulness to justify that civic initiative. I, for instance, am impeded from pursuit of United States of America identity card because of divorce, even though I was forced on status of diversity lottery extension to my spouse, legally valid as green card, in refusal to depend and manipulate me of visa when there was a demand to hire me as in fact human rights advocate in leadership in education and human rights activities, and I resent refusal to do so based on distorted